It looks like we're broadcasting. So we'll just make sure. Come on. It looks like we're broadcasting. Come on, it should be just make screen sharing. Come on. Okay, there it is. All right, so another night of crap and such. Usual bad physics everywhere. So I did watch some Dullard crap on his cosmic induction generator, some project he's been soliciting money for forever. Um, but just the whole idea, they call it a generator. It's the only thing it's going to generate is an electric bill. That's what it's going to generate. It's whatever. It's just such a bunch of crap. And then everybody else is full of shit too. So I did watch a little bit of the David D. Hilster question and answer video thingy, but just a few minutes. So I don't know if he got to a subject or not. He's starting to talk about the stupid small Earth crap again, and it's just extraordinary claim. Please provide more than just a simple argument like it all fits together. Well, it would all fit together on a round Earth too if it was one clump. So that doesn't say, it's not saying much. Not saying enough for you to be so aggressive. And then this whole claim that the oil isn't dead dinosaurs, well, dead vegetation, it's just silly. But anyway, you really have to have evidence for that crap. You can't just say it like, you can say it, but I'm just saying you don't have any credibility if you don't show up with some evidence. Real evidence to explain that, this he claims dinosaurs couldn't exist in gravity. That's sort of been analyzed by science a lot. And yeah, they had really big bones. They're stocky and yeah, they could be that big. It's just bullshit. So I'm going to enjoy a cigarette before all the nasty people show up, ruin my fun. The other thing weird about the David D. Hilster guy, I found out his birthday is just a week before mine. So, he's just a week older than I am. 1 week. So he's a winter person, born in the winter. I would argue people have more character if they're born in the winter. It's just an argument of mine. But David's sort of an exception, right, to my rule. He's sort of a bullshitter. But anyway, I wonder if my mic's working. I don't know if I tested that. Hello? Yes, it's working. Okay. So I heard, I tested it when I played the video. Just making sure. I did reverse my image, so now when I go, they went that away, I'll be saying the same that away that you're seeing. So that's sort of important. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to can't see the link, so I have to move this thing, I guess. Yes, I do. For now, I have my link here somewhere in my little box of fun. This first link, I think. All right, so it's another example of the double slit explained wrong by a really professional physicist, really good, makes good, thoughtful, educational videos. But again, it can't get this fundamental experiment in physics right. Can't get the history right, can't get the story right. It's just, this is a really bad foundation for physics. This is their foundational experiment. Like if it was just a peripheral experiment, you'd say, okay, so what if it's got some three bears in it and some bullshit in it? But this is their foundation of their physics. And they really got to get this shit right. It's like the editing story. You got to get that story right. So let's go to the...
And that is certainly true. It's broadly true if what you do is to close off one of the slits. So if you close off one of the slits, you will actually get, broadly, that kind of impact. You'll get a bright area on the screen.
There you go. Same old crap, right? So first you use sand as an example. And then he does this blocking of the slits after he's already started to explain these are photons now. And again, the same typical bullshit. We'll just pretend for the dramatic effect that we don't know about single slit patterns. Then when he shows the actual single slit pattern later, he shows the weakest version of it, okay? The one with the 90% hump and the little tiny little humps. When we know the single slit can create 40 bands, you know, and yes, the center's very bright, but the other bands are really bright too. You can see them all. So we know it does a lot more than what they're showing. And it's just to emphasize a narrative that isn't the truth, that there's something fundamentally different between the single slit and the double slit. And fundamentally, no, there's something very, very similar. And it's only in the subtleties that you'll find the differences. And this is just crap science. This is garbage and junk. So this is Dr. Physics A. This video got 84,000 views, 607 thumbs up, 15 thumbs down. And he's explaining it incorrectly. And that's okay with everyone. I'm evil because I'm pointing out how this isn't the story and it's not the truth. It's not how reality works, and Newton knew it. Newton knew a single slit didn't do that. And Newton probably had reasonable speculation that this smallness of the slit, obviously Newton didn't hear about Heisenberg or any of this other nonsense. And his deduction probably was, well, I bet you it has something to do with making that matter closer to the photons as they go through. But Huygens did invent his nonsense at the same time. So they forget about Newton's rings, but they do remember Huygens's gimmick, the gimmick that's never been demonstrated to be a fact in any experiment ever.
But if you open up the second slit, and indeed if you close off the top slit, you will get the bottom effect.
So again, you won't. So if you have a single slit that small, you won't get a single hump. You'll get a pattern. That's just the truth. It'll be a different pattern than in the double slit, but it will be a pattern. And the truth is the double slit will be inside the envelope of the single slit pattern. Now, it just depends on the width of the slit, which no one talks about either. The pattern varies dramatically depending on how wide or narrow the slit is. That is, how much the photons are likely to be close to a surface and how likely they're not to be close to a surface dramatically affects the pattern. That'll never be talked about.
But if you open up both the slits, what do you actually get? Well, let's just draw this again. Here are the double slits.
And like I said, there's absolutely no expectation. Anybody who's known what Newton talked about 300 years ago would be aware of this, and this is no big surprise.
Here's the monochromatic single source of light, so the same light goes through both slits. There's the screen, and what you actually get, opposite the sort of central point, is you will get a bright area, but then it falls off to an area of darkness. Then,
right, which he draws rather poorly. Is the area of darkness is supposed to be equal to the area of the brightness. They're equal areas, but they never draw that right either.
Area of light, then darkness, then light, then darkness, then light. And similarly on this side, light, dark, light, dark. And these are fringes. So on the screen, what you're...
Yes, that's what you've called them. That's your labeling of them. What they are is locations. And there's as Feynman would say, a probability of a photon going to these different locations. And there's a cause for that probability. And that's where the dispute is. This guy claims the cause is some unproven Huygens wave rounding BS. I'm claiming the cause is likely has something to do with the interaction of a photon with the material surfaces. and that increases the likelihood of being diffracted. Period.
Actually seeing is brightness, dark, bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, dark.
Now he couldn't, even that. I mean, that's just such an interesting quirk of personality. The fact that he would just keep doing that and not know to stop after 4. 4 would be more than enough. And he just kept going for all 7 or 8.
Right, all the way down. Those are called fringes.
Again, you've already told me that, and that's just a word for your purposes. So you could call them wavages or some other kind of bullshit. And it has nothing to do with establish that that's what it is. That's what it's caused by. It's caused by interference, but that causes fringes. So this label doesn't mean anything. There's no evidence that it is until you establish it with actual facts. And those facts haven't been demonstrated. Let's see, that's not the chat window. I have to put the chat window back somewhere in the findable range. All right, yesterday counter space, today fringes. God damn. Yeah, well, it's just about the, this is their story. They've had 100 years to work on it. And so, yes, they've got a shtick. But if you're an honest person, you say, this isn't enough evidence for these conclusions. They're inventing whole universes because of this stupid experiment. They're pretending, that we can now invent universes. We can invent radar. The little smallest things in the universe are the most elaborate. They have the most features. Photons can do things we can't do. And that makes sense to you people.
In other words, you get darkness at a point where previously you got light.
Right. Now, so we know that previously, this previous drawing is inaccurate, incorrect, wrong, not right. So we are not sure what exactly all the positions of the bars were in the appropriate width of single slit. So if we did a single slit experiment, the size of the double slit experiments slits, and then we have to recognize we're now separating them. But let's just say we have a single slit of the same dimensions. What kind of pattern do we get? And there may be areas that would have been light, but they also might have been all light, okay, previously, and now parts of them are dark. And that's the curious feature. You open a second slit, and now you have areas that are dark. Now, but we don't have any proof that that actually happens here. We have a fake, false drawing. So it's not fake, it's just false. It's not the correct drawing of what this size slit will produce. So he's making a false comparison. I'm just saying it's just false on its face. And the argument should be made with something actually proven, not something just surmised based on a false assertion about what happens when a single slit passes light.
Light. So how is it that if you get light with one slit and more light with a second slit, with both of them open, you actually get darkness where...
So we know that you don't open 2 slits next to each other and get 2 humps. So we know that doesn't happen. That's the same experiment as down here. So we know that's not what happens. So again, it's just a false comparison. And the point is that, I have argued that the reason why the single impediment is in the math when on the double slit in exchange for the same variable that used to be the opening is for this very reason, that there is a change in that surface depending on the distance between surfaces. The distance between surfaces matters statically. It changes the surface's matter as you change the thickness, just like a piece of glass changes its reflexive index as you change how far apart the 2 surfaces of the glass are. So if you change how far apart the surfaces are, you change the character of those surfaces. That is, the atoms change their position based on how much material there is. The amount of material makes a difference in terms of how the atoms line up.
Previously, with only one slit, you got light. How can that be? The answer lies.
No, the answer I just provided is a reasonable explanation, but neither of us have evidence of anything. I mean, hard evidence. They're just making up a story. I think my story is a hell of a lot more reasonable than their story. That's the accusation I'm making. Their Huygens Heisenberg story, unproven, is not in any way superior to the logical story that the surfaces change as you change the distance between the surfaces. Their charge changes, their character changes, and therefore the probability of the outcome changes.
In the nature of waves, it's called superposition. Imagine.
All right, so this is another wacky thing. All right, superposition doesn't have anything to do with the nature of waves. Just it has to do with the nature of a force. So the idea is something's radiating a force and it's here. Something else is radiating a force and it's here. Now, when those forces cross, the idea is what happens. Do the forces change any? Or do the forces bounce off each other? Do the forces interact and mix? So they're arguing that these forces do mix, that they interfere with each other and create a too much or a nothing, something or a nothing, because they're interfering. Now, all the evidence in the old days, the word superposition would be used, say 100 years ago, was the idea that we knew from charge that there was no superposition. That, in fact, one charge can't interact with the force of another charge at all. You have to put another charge in to measure the strength of the two charges and then have the addition done. So there's no mixing of the charges until you put another charge in, and that charge will measure the strength of this charge versus the strength of this charge. And it works the same for gravity, and it works the same for magnetism, and it works. This is the way it works. Magnets won't interact based on their fields. The actual force from one magnet has to reach the material of the magnet. And likewise, this magnet has to reach the material of the other magnet. The forces themselves will not mix. And you can only measure these forces additively, in the sense that if you put a third magnet in, it will do the addition. It'll tell you how strong this magnet is versus how strong this magnet is. It will figure it out. And it'll figure it out because the force is hitting matter. So in all of what we know about physics, in all the experiments of physics, there is no mixing of fields or forces. They don't mix. They don't interfere. They don't combine. And they are only measurable with an object. A material object has to measure them to superimpose them, to have them mix. They can't be mixed unless there's a piece of matter to do the mixing. That's what's established fact. This is completely inconsistent with that fact, in that all the other forces except for light, okay, don't do this. Even electrons don't do this, okay? The electron charge force doesn't do this interference thing. Two electrons do not mix their field energies together.
That you drop two stones into a pond, a still pond. And this is where the two stones fall into the pond. They will create ripples, or waves, which will spread.
Right, and that's a nice little fact, but we're talking about photons again. We're not talking about any established medium. We're not talking about this at all. I mean, the photons don't have much in common with the molecular field of a body of water. No, I don't think so. Well, we'll take my phone call here. I think there's a mute button on here. Yeah. All right, sorry, a little timeout. Play with yourselves for a moment. All right, it should be back. Yes, trivial matter of no consequence. So, of course, these people. Anyway, so yes, continuing. I mean, it's just not, it's really nice that there's interference patterns in water, but it's not the same experiment. And the results aren't exactly the same. I mean, the water waves are measuring uh, places where there's agitation, a very high peak and a very low low. So a very ultimate ultra black versus all the way on, and versus a neutral, a ground state. So, it's not even measuring the same thing in terms of one's measuring an intensity that goes from 0 to positive, and the other one's just the ground neutral.
Out across the pond. And it's the point where the ripples overlap that you get what's called interference.
Right, and it's a medium. So he used the word superposition before, and clearly mediums interfere with each other. Mediums are under tension. The tension is in the waves. The waves will interfere with each other because the waves are physical objects. They're physical entities. But that's not what the forces are that control the movement of photons.
That means that you've got crests of one set of ripples meeting crests and troughs of another set of ripples. And what happens in those circumstances? A crest meets a crest.
All right, so the funny thing about this is this guy does a ton of math in most of his videos. They're really heavy on math. And here he is just dumbing this down and doing this simplification like it's for a general audience. It's an hour video, an hour-long video, and most of it, like I said, will be mathematics and bullshit. And so it doesn't even make any sense that he's doing this dumbed-down version. Like, oh, I'm going to explain what wave interference is, and explain, I mean, I just don't think anyone capable of doing the math or being interested in the math or even watching the math needs this primer on something so basic.
Here's a crest coming this way, meeting a crest from this set of ripples. They will in fact pass through one another and go out the other side. But when they overlap, you get what's called superposition. You get a double crest.
Right. So that's another fact. I mean, the fact that they just do go right through each other as if no effect. And it's only for that one moment that there's this superposition. And again, no real comparison to the circumstance of the radiation that light is. Light is this force. It isn't being affected by a force. Light is a force, and it doesn't superposition like all the other forces. It doesn't do that.
Similarly, if you've got a trough from this stone meeting a trough from this stone, again you get superposition.
Right, redundancy.
A double-sized trough. But if you get a crest from this set of ripples meeting a trough from this set of ripples, you get flat water, assuming that the amplitudes of the two are the same.
Right. So you get the big low and the big high, and the other one you get is the neutral. So again, not really comparable, because in the photon experiment, we're talking about light all the way on or light all the way off, and there is no neutral. There's nothing in between. So it is a little bit different. And clearly in the two-slit experiment, which has to be understood, is that there's no argument that there's a circumstance where on and off and double or negative meet and there's a no light, like photon plus photon equals no photon. That can't actually happen. Photons aren't destroyed in the two-slit experiment. What really happens is all the photons go this way or this way, and none of them go this way. So you have twice as many at one location and none, and then twice as many in another location. But there's no neutral nothing thing. That can't happen. That doesn't happen.
So we have to get two identical stones and throw them in from the same height to get the same amplitude of waves. They cancel out. And it's that cancelling out that is the reason why you get dark fringes at all of these points here, because the waves somehow manage to cancel each other out. That's
so again, it's just he's saying that's how it happens, but all there is an angle, and the photons either go here, or they go to this angle, or they go to this angle, or they go to this angle, by a similar rule to the fact that inside the atom, the electron can only exist in this orbit, or this orbit, or this orbit. Now, no one's arguing that those are interference fringes. No one's arguing that if I took the pattern of an atom and took a slice of it, so I turned into a rectangle instead of a circle, that and I'd get bars, and the atom would look like bars. Is somebody arguing that now automatically it's an interference pattern? And the reason why electrons are at certain energy levels is because of interference and because of they're superimposing. Superposition causes it. No one's arguing that. And so why are they doing it here? Why all these assumptions here?
It's the principle of superposition. On the other hand, if the waves reinforce one another like this, then you get a double crest or a double trough. Now, what is actually happening when a wave goes through a slit? You'll notice in the diagram.
So again, a wave. I mean, I just, no concession to even wave particle duality. I mean, they just don't even want to, they really don't want to accept that there's any particle nature to these photons at all. So, as much as people talk about how stupid wave particle duality is, clearly they don't even want to hear it, because they always say light is a wave. Even though Feynman said clearly it's a corpuscle, they just keep saying, no, it's a wave, it's a wave, it's a wave, it's a wave. They can never describe it by honestly saying, well, we don't know quite what this force is, but the force is at a frequency, and this is where it's coming. No, they call it a wave, even though they haven't proven it's a wave. It's rays of light, not waves of light. They're rays, waving rays. That's a weird duality.
I drew that I showed that the light seemed to spread out a bit. Well, let's take
so now he's talking about his stupid little hump, and he's calling that spreading out a bit, which obviously it doesn't do that. It either diffracts, I mean, it's diffracting. The angle's changing. It's not just it just happens. It happens by the very same mechanism that creates the full pattern, creates the very wide central maxima. Same force, same mechanism. It's always the same mechanism.
Waves, what we call plane waves, coming from our source.
So again, and the way the experiment was originally done, ironically, is to prevent plane waves. Because the way the experiment was originally done is to always have a single slit, a small aperture, that the light is first put through before it gets to the slits. So they actually took the light young, put the light through a small aperture before it hit the slits. That's how the experiment was originally done. So clearly it wasn't straight waves going in, it was already curved waves going in. Just a fact.
These are plane waves. These are rather like the waves of the crest on the sea. So if these lines each represent the crests, then the wave looks something like this.
Right. It's just a perversion of the reality to say that every single thing that is a on-off pattern is now a wave. And that's all. You can do that to every single on-off pattern, every single pattern. So the pattern inside the atom of the electrons having discrete quantized orbits, because it has those, therefore I can draw one of those squiggly lines on it and I can say it's wave interference. And everybody just will automatically believe that's the truth. I don't have to prove it. I don't have to demonstrate in any way that it's interference causing it. I'll just say every time there's a pattern, I'll draw a wave on it and say on, off, that's a wave.
So that each of the lines, there'd be another line here, represents a crest of the wave and the distance.
So I would argue that all it represents is photon, separated photon, photon, photon. It just represents the distance between the corpuscles, period. That's all, nothing complicated. Corpuscle, 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 corpuscle. And the stuff in between, no corpuscle, no corpuscle, no corpuscle, no corpuscle. Not complicated. Bowling ball, no bowling ball. Bowling ball, no bowling ball. Bowling ball, no bowling ball.
Between the lines is called the wavelength. Now, what happens when plane waves meet?
Right, so they have three different ways, period, wavelength, frequency, to say exactly the same thing. Like, that doesn't create confusion in and of itself. You know, the frequency and the wavelength are just inverted fractions of each other. That's all they are. They're just reciprocals of each other. Totally superfluous.
A gap where the gap is broadly the same size as the wavelength.
Okay, so he said that, and it's not even close. So that was just wrong. It's never this. The gap is never the same size as the wavelength. It's always, I don't know how many times bigger, but bigger. And you can understand that from like when you start getting very tiny, thin slits, like in diffraction gradients or something. And so, yeah, the experiment's generally not done with openings the size of the wavelength, because the amount of light that'll get through one opening the size of the light's wavelength is infinitesimally small. You won't see anything. There's not enough photons will get through.
What happens is that gap becomes what's called a Huygens source.
Huygens. It's a Huygens source. But anyway, so Huygens goes back to Newton's time. You know, he had some conversations with Newton and they argued about some of this stuff. Not really directly related to Newton's rings, but more related to why light diffracts on surfaces, refracts. You know, Huygens was a wave guy, and Newton wasn't persuaded. That's as far as the story goes. But Newton wasn't persuaded by anybody. And Newton didn't have a hard theory.
I've probably not pronounced that properly. It's a Dutch name, and you need to be able to get the right intonation.
Yes, Huygens. Huygens.
But I'll call it a Huygens source after the man Huygens. And essentially, it becomes a separate source of waves. And so you get waves spreading out in all directions, rather like the ripple.
Right. Now, so you get the rounded waves out and a Huygens source. But we know that in the single slit, it's two waves because they create the interference. And he addresses that later by not addressing it. I mean, he points out how, well, isn't it a little bit wacky that we're talking about Huygens here in the double slit, and then we're not doing the same thing in this, but he doesn't explain the contradiction. He in no way, he just does it again. He just turns that one wave into two waves. So as soon as he starts doing the math, all of a sudden there's going to be two waves there where there's just one now. And there's absolutely no explanation for how Huygens works that way. How in the double slit, in the single slit, to create interference, she has to make two waves there, or there's no interference. So this, again, isn't an accurate description of what we know happens. We know it's not a single wave. We know that there's two Huygenses that come out of there. There's two waves that come out of that single slit. Or there's no math. There's no single slit pattern. There has to be two waves. And how come when you do the double slit, you don't get four waves? If you get two waves with one slit, how come you don't get four waves with the double slit? Nobody has answered that question yet. Seems an easy enough question, right? What's the big deal? Right? Why can't people answer the simple question? How is Huygens appropriately used? In what version are they inappropriately using it? Are they inappropriately using it to create two waves when there's a single opening? Or are they inappropriate using it to create just two waves when there's two openings and there should be four waves? Which one's right and which one's wrong? Because Huygens can't do both. The same principle can't do both without an explanation of how it does both.
On the pool, they'll have the same wavelength, but that wave will move in this direction. This wave down here will move in this direction, so it's moving down there. This one's moving.
And again, they're rays of light. Rays of light. Light goes places in straight lines. I mean, it's a ray of light, not a wave of light.
Moving up in that direction. The wave spreads out in all directions. That's called diffraction. As the plane waves come to the slit is broadly the same width or the same width as the wavelength, then you get this diffraction effect and the light or the waves spread out. By contrast, if the slit is too large, here is the slit, here are the waves coming in this direction. If the slit is too large, the waves simply pass through. They don't even realize that there's a slit there. On the other hand,
no, that doesn't happen either. On each one of those individual surfaces, there is some diffraction and there are some spreading. It's just not as much. It's greatly reduced, but there's still an effect. So similar to charge, right? You separate the two charged plates, for example. You separate them, the charge goes down. You draw them together, the charge goes up. You know, not that complicated.
If the slit is too small, then the waves come along in this direction and they simply reflect and bounce back in the other direction.
Right. So again, accurate, inaccurate? No. Some of the photons get through. It's just too small a number for us to see. But clearly photons get through. I mean, there's no evidence they don't get through. I mean, when they do the when they do the experiment where they reduce the light to such a low level that only single little photons are getting through, you know, over a month period, clearly they're doing exactly this. They're creating openings that are so tiny that only one photon in a week will get through a hole. It's such a small hole, but a photon goes through. So again, he's not describing reality accurately here.
They don't realize there's a slit to go through. So if it's too small, they reflect. If it's too big, they go through undaunted.
Let's just understand, we can't make a hole smaller than a photon. So you can't make a hole that doesn't let a photon through. Yeah, really can't.
But if the slit is about the same size as the wavelength, then you get this process called diffraction.
Right, and again, it's not the same size as the wavelength, and you get the pattern at a slit width that's 10 times the wavelength of the light.
So what happens with the double slit experiment? Here's the double slit. Here are the waves coming along, and what they're going to happen when they get to these slits, they're each going to form a Huygens source.
So let's understand, because he just described the single slit inaccurately. So he showed you a single slit and showed one wave. Didn't show any interference pattern, no mechanism for interference, nothing. And now we'll draw the fake, what's the word I use instead of fake? The fraudulent, no, false. He's using the false image of the single slit pattern to now illustrate the double slit pattern, but it's a false image of the single slit pattern because the single slit pattern isn't just one wave. it's two waves interfering with each other. So now he can draw one wave and make it sound coherent because he drew it wrong for the single slit. So again, this is, I'm not saying it's deliberately deceptive. It's just clearly inaccurate. And people keep defending this inaccuracy, this horrible inaccuracy. Why do you keep doing that? Why do you keep defending this horrible inaccuracy? Let's see, you were shown this page 1 year ago where Huygens was applied consistently to both scenarios. So again, that's a lie. So you're just going to get blocked. I was shown no such thing. I was shown 4 pages of mathematical derivatives that never even compared it to a real experiment. How is that showing how Huygens is applied? There was no drawing of Huygens. There was no drawing of the single slit 2 waves and then the double slit with just 2 waves. Where was that drawing shown, asshole? And where was there any explanation for why there's only 2 waves in the double slit and there's only 2 waves in the single slit? How can a single slit and a double slit create only 2 fucking waves? How can they both create exactly the same number of waves? Asshole, that's a direct fucking question to you. Answer the direct fucking question or I'm blocking you. Yes, you're defending him. You're defending a pile of horse shit. You fucking liar. So this gets deleted. Not that it matters. But, I mean, frankly, I already explained everything that's been shown to me, you lying sack of shit. So don't tell me that you've done something, that you've proven something, because I played it, I showed it, and I explained why it's a piece of fucking steaming crap. That's how you get the humps within the humps. There's no humps within the pumps in this drawing, is there, asshole? Is there any explanation for why the single slit creates 2 waves and the double slit only creates 2 waves? Do you have an answer to the fucking question? And if you don't, then fuck off. You're off the subject. The subject is your crap science, and it's crap. And I'm illustrating it's crap. And you're just lying that they have an answer. There is no answer in this video. There's no answer on your fucking website. There's no answer in my comments section from any of you cunts to the simple fucking question. How can the principal create 2 fucking waves in the single slit and only 2 waves when there's 2 fucking slits? How the fuck does a principal do that? You lying sack of fucking useless shit. Okay. That's how you get the humps within the humps pattern, which admittedly people usually don't handle. Well, this is the whole point. The point is this video is inaccurate. Do you see the subject of this fucking video is this inaccuracy? Okay? And again, I've already paraphrased your fucking useless sack of shit website forum page with the 4 pages of fucking derivatives. Derivatives don't explain how Huygens is applied, shithead. It has nothing to do with Huygens. There's no Huygens in the fucking math, you retard. No Huygens in the math. The math has algebraic angles in it, retard. No fucking waves, no fucking Huygens is in the fucking math, you fucking cunt. All right, you're done. The full formulas were derived. The formula has no Huygens in it, you lying piece of shit. God, I just can't believe these fucking cunts. They have no integrity. I asked the question directly right to his little cunt weaselly face, and he won't answer the fucking question. I point out how his fucking website doesn't provide a single solution, doesn't prove its math is correct by actually comparing it to a real experiment, and on top of that, has no hope of explaining Huygens because Huygens isn't in the math. There's no Huygens in the math. God damn, you people are such fucking despicable lying sacks of cunt shit. Despicable.
So rather like the stones in the pond, you're going to get two sets of ripples.
Right, where and if you applied the simple rule of Huygens, each one of those slits, right? Slit number 1 would create 2 waves. Slit number 2 would create 2 waves. Therefore, you would have 4 waves interfering with each other. Why aren't there 4 waves interfering with each other? Why does Huygens, how do photons know, hey, there's 2 slits, I can't Huygens? How do they know? That's the rule. 1 slit. Oh, yeah, split in 2. Okay, I get you. I'm going to become 2 waves, the photon says. It goes to a double slit. It says, I'm just going to be 1 wave. Look, I'm 1 wave. It's horse shit.
From these 2 slits, and where the waves overlap, you're going to get interference. Where you've got double crests or double troughs, you'll get constructive interference. In other words, you will get double-sized crests and double-sized troughs. Where you've got a crest meeting a trough, you're going to...
So again, just absolute bullshit, because the photons don't work that way. Photons don't do that. Photon plus photon doesn't equal nothing. And as I pointed out, it's demonstrated fact that you don't lose more light. The light doesn't go, it isn't photon plus photon equals nothing. So again, this description is completely inaccurate to what actually happens. The photons go, okay, when there's photon plus photon equals dark, that means the photon went here or it went here. It doesn't go here. That's all it means. It didn't go here, it went here or it went here, but it went somewhere. So this is all horse shit. There's no photon decides to go nowhere. Every single photon goes a specific place. It only goes to the positive locations. It doesn't ever go to the negative location. So unlike a wave, that where at the neutral point you still have water, in the case of the photons, there is no photons there. No photons go there. None.
You get what's called destructive interference. In other words, the 2 will cancel out and you will get darkness. I should explain that for light, each of these slits has to be kind of nothing more than a small pinhole.
So Moore just pointed out in this vague manner, where I should say more precisely, there's a range. There's a specific range of width from like a tenth of a millimeter to a millimeter that you'll get a pattern. And anything above that or anything below that, and you'll get no pattern. So this isn't like brain surgery or something. There's a specific range, and you'd think a doctor of physics would know that and know how to express that. Oh, look, he's created more fake accounts. I'm done with you, shithead. You're a liar. You're a disgusting fucking liar. First off, that page started with Huygens derived in the formulas. There's no Huygens in the formula. There's no Huygens in the math. You're just lying. It doesn't exist in the math. There's no wave in the math. There's no Huygens in the math. You're just a fucking liar. There's no variable that is Huygens. There's sine theta. There's an angle, fuckhead. Not a wave, not any of that horse shit. There's already the finished product after Huygens. After Huygens is where you get the wave, you get the angle from. Okay? There's no Huygens in the fucking math, you lying sack of fucking goddamn shit. Second, you can graph the form. No, again, more lies. Fuck your graph. There's a drawing right here. How have you answered my simple question? Why aren't there 4 waves in the double slit experiment? Answer the fucking question, you little weasel. All right. Third, it's that people don't apply it. However, it can be applied to both scenarios. I don't care. This is a doctor of physics. He's explaining the most fundamental goddamn fucking experiment in fucking quantum mechanics, and he can't do it accurately. That's the subject of this fucking video, you little weasel piece of shit. Don't just keep making fake accounts, you lying sack of shit. You're a fucking liar. There is no formula that has Huygens in it. None. Zero. No waves interfering with each other. There's fucking distance change lines. Lines of distance to a point. Like it was rays. Not like it was waves. Like they were rays of light. You fucking piece of shit liar. It's in this math. He's going to be doing the math soon enough, you little weasel.
With the same gap between them. So the distance between them is very, very small, and the holes themselves are very, very tiny. In order that, as I've said, the pinholes have to be broadly the same.
So broadly, so all this bullshit, it doesn't, again, so in the double slit experiment, the math doesn't even have the width of the slits in it. The variable, the most important variable, the slit width, isn't in the math for the double slit experiment because they just assume it. They just assume it's broadly blah, 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 blah. Because all that really matters is the width of that center impediment, the distance between the center impediment. And it's basically assumed that the slits are the same width as the center impediment. That's how bullshit the math is. The math is far from perfect math. It's incredibly imperfect and imprecise math. And this is the horseshit they're selling as the most predictive theory in the universe, the most perfect. This all works out so perfectly. And as I've pointed out, the double slit pattern and the single slit pattern are not the same in photons as they are in electrons. The electron pattern has a clear gradation. You know, the waveness of the transitions is perfect. In the photon experiment, very harsh bars. No gradation the way it's supposed to be.
Wavelength is the wavelength of the light.
Another point not addressed by these lousy fucking pieces of shit.
But in order to understand what's going on, we need to magnify this significantly. So let's assume that these are our two slits.
You know, it'd be really cool is if you actually did think about magnifying it. You did an Einstein thing and thought about what it'd be like to sit on a photon. Why don't you think what it would be like to be standing next to the surface of a material substance and think for a minute about how, oh yeah, the atoms aren't flat and square. They have electrons going around them. They're circular. They don't really create a flat surface. There's a bunch of empty space in it. There's a little nucleus and the electrons are way far away. And oh yeah, there's a bunch of empty space on the surface, sort of. Why don't you think about it?
And they are a distance d apart. And although the wave...
So he's made his little holes and made the distance huge. So the distance is much bigger than the slits now, which isn't the way you're supposed to do the experiment. So just horse shit. Let's not bother being terribly accurate. And this is what he calls zooming in. This is getting a better look by drawing it even more proportionally wrong.
These are going to move off from these slits in all directions. I am, for the moment, going to consider a wave which moves off in that direction.
Yeah, so he's just pretending now that ends up at the same point because the d distance is very small. So the two lines look essentially parallel, but they're really not. You know, and so there's this subtle. So this is where they just do the Pythagorean bullshit. This has nothing to do with Huygens. There's no Huygens here. This is just an algebraic measuring of the fact that the further away hole from the target is a longer line. Duh. And that's what they're going to represent as the phase shift, which is perfectly rational. It creates a phase shift, yes, but that's all. There's no evidence that it has anything to do with any waves interfering.
From the two slits, and that's going to be at an angle theta to, as it were, the horizontal. Now I drop a perpendicular down to this line.
So obviously the d distance, once you have the sine theta, the d distance is completely in control of how long this line is, and that's the whole subject. So the closer they are, the shorter this distance gets. And the bigger the distance, the larger this line gets. And it's just that simple. So bring the slits closer, bring the holes closer together, and you increase the amount of distance, the length of the angle difference, and you also create the fact that they're more likely to be out of phase. But again, it's not a phase difference that's what's showing up at the target. The target's either a whole photon or no photon. So again, the photons are just saying, basically, I either go 3 degrees, I go 6 degrees, I go 9 degrees, I go 0 degrees. That's all the photon's saying.
Here, and we know that this distance here is d. That's the gap.
So let's see if there's any other comments. Not the double slit, anything but crazy ass double slit. All right, okay, so we can't talk about the foundational experiment to fucking quantum mechanics. And you think you're going to just whine about it. It's the most important experiment in the history of physics. And you're just going to sit there and whine that you've already heard it. Well, clearly these people haven't heard it. Clearly there's only 15 people out of 607 people who thought this was a marvelous video. There's only 15 people who don't think it's marvelous. And they probably don't think it's marvelous for the reasons I'm pointing out. They probably don't think it's marvelous because they believe in God or something and they don't want to accept that Huygens exists. But fuck you. It's not a helpful comment, whining and complaining. Yeah, it's a pain in the ass to have to go through all this shit over and over again. But until these assholes concede their physics is weak, you have to keep pointing it out. What else can I do? All right. I mean, I'm sort of sick of arguing with Christians, but you still have to do it. Fucker. You people really are no help at all. I mean, you're just naysayers and nitpickers. You just never say, you're right, Gary, this is outrageous. We got to straighten this out. The world can't be run by these kind of assholes who do all this propaganda bullshit. Science ought to have a more integrity than this, than to fuck up their most sacred experiment. It's a dirt simple fucking experiment. It's goddamn so fucking simple. No fucking black boxes that do mysterious weird things. No beam splitter magic. No bullshit. And they can't even describe a simple fucking experiment accurately. And you're complaining to me. You're complaining to me. You should be complaining to them.
The thickness of the slit itself. And what I want to know is, what is x, which is the distance from here to here? Well, if this is theta, then this angle here, by geometry, is also theta, which means that x over d is sine theta. X over d is sine theta, which means that x over d equals sine theta, x equals d sine theta. That's just pure geometry.
Right. So it's just the distance times the sine of this angle. And that will tell you that as the distance gets this much more, then the separation gets, I think wider. And the closer it is, it gets narrower. And the rest of it just has to do with whether, the interference part is just has to do with the phase change measured as distance.
But what happens if x is equal to lambda, i.e. the wavelength of the waves, or n lambda, where n is any whole number, integer? If that's the case.
All right, so another gimmick is this is the n number. So for the single slit, n is 0, I think. And for the double slit, starts with. And then for the double, it's the other way around. So for the double slit, n starts with a 0. So the middle is labeled 0. And then in the single slit, n starts with 1. So the middle is 1. And then you have 2. And then you have 3. And then you have 4. And then you have 5. So another gimmick. Another change without an explanation.
Then the waves will be in phase. These two waves will be in phase, and you will get constructive interference. What I mean by that is that this wave will move in this direction like this. This wave will also do the same, but if this distance x is one complete wavelength, then you can see that.
Should have started with like a half wavelength just to illustrate the point. But obviously, yes, this one has a longer distance, so there's added waving. And so the waving no longer has the same pattern because one person starts sooner than the other. So if I start skipping and I'm a little bit ahead of another guy and he has the same length legs and he starts skipping, our skips will be out of phase.
From this point on, this wave is wholly in phase with this wave up here. The two are exactly in phase because this distance here was one complete wavelength, or any number n, where n is.
Right, so there's one complete wavelength. So this is where it proves that his argument about how the separation between these slits, he was arguing it's supposed to be a wavelength. Clearly, this little line can't be the same length as this longer line. I mean, clearly, this has to be a much smaller line than this line, especially with a small sine theta angle. There's no way for those two lines to be the same length. So you'll never have a wavelength that's the same size as the slit width. So he was just wrong about that. I mean, just wrong. All right, that's just semantics. They're more baby talk. You can label shit any way you want. Again, just what does that even mean? What does this have to do with labeling something? I ask direct questions. This is the rubbish you fucking goddamn respond with. That's just semantics. You can label shit any way you want. What do you believe? Do you believe Huygens creates one wave when it goes through a slit, or do you think it creates two waves when it goes through a slit? What do you believe, asshole? Do you think waves actually do this? Waves actually create two waves? You think the Huygens principle actually works, where the wave comes to the opening and the wave breaks into two waves? Do you think that actually fucking happens in reality? Retard? Asswipe? Fuckhead?
The whole number of wavelengths, so that you're going to get constructive interference because crest meets crest, trough meets trough. Your eye is up here looking at everything as it arrives.
So clearly that's not how it works, because our eye is a tiny little pupil and it's focused, and you can't do that. We have to look at it as it's projected on a screen. So that's not even accurate either.
So that is the position for constructive interference. Crest meets crest to produce a double crest. Trough meets trough to produce a double trough. That's not what happens. As I pointed out, no photons go to the dead space. All the photons go to the white light spaces. So twice as many photons arrive at the banded locations. No photons arrive at the dark locations, obviously. Very different than describing this cancellation bullshit. There is no cancellation. The position of constructive interference. So if x is d sine theta, but x equals lambda.
So here we got some more lies by the fake account people or something. God damn, though. It's so sad you can just lie about that page. Okay, I didn't lie about anything, so it's just a lie there. Which started with Huygens. We're done. It didn't explain why there's two waves in the single slit experiment and only two waves in the double slit experiment. Did it explain that somewhere, liar? You fucking liar. You disgusting fucking liar. I mean, just amazing. This must be mindless douchebag. Another fucking psychotic troll. All right, so you say I can't get away with anything. You can't even post the link to your stupid. You can't even find your dopey page again. Go find your stupid dopey forum page again. I'll go to it and rip it another new asshole. How about that? And I'll show exactly how you're full of shit, how it doesn't answer any of these questions I just asked right here. Doesn't explain why in photons the pattern is different than electrons. Doesn't explain how Huygens creates two waves in the single slit and only two waves in the double slit. Doesn't explain any of this stuff. None of it. Not one tiny bit of it. All right, and then you keep saying that the theory isn't applied consistency when the fact is that people don't apply it consistently. When in fact, it's that the people don't apply it consistently. There's no way to apply it consistently. There's no way to make 2 waves in the single slit pattern and to make 4 waves in the double slit. The math didn't have 4 waves in it, you liar. Okay, when the math did the double slit experiment, it didn't do it with 4 waves interfering with each other, liar. So you're done. But Christoph's diffraction formula has nothing to do with this. So just keep lying. You fucking liar. God damn it. Voracious liars is all that can show up here.
Or n lambda, then the condition for constructive interference is that n lambda, which is x, is equal to d sine theta.
Right. That just means n is just the number of where you expect the maxima to be. That's it. Or the minima. You know, they're just numbered. That's it. So if you're looking for minima, you use the number commensurate. And if you're looking for maxima, you use the number commensurate. But it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's all the n is. Completely meaningless.
From this formula up here. And that is the condition for bright fringes. And I think you can see that if x is equal to lambda over 2, in other words, half a wavelength, or 2n minus 1 times lambda over 2, which means an odd number of half wavelengths, because obviously an even.
Yeah, so he's just going to basically say 1/2 n is going to be the dark spot. So we're okay. Go ahead.
Even number of half wavelengths is a number of whole wavelengths. So an odd number of half wavelengths, or just 1/2 a wavelength, then this distance here would only be half a wavelength, and consequently these waves would actually be completely out of phase. So that would be the condition whereby a crest would meet a trough to produce nothing. So that,
and again, that doesn't happen. So let's just point out again, there's no such thing as the light being destroyed. It doesn't annihilate or some other crap like that. The photons actually hit the location next to one of the places where the light actually goes. The photon always goes somewhere. It doesn't nullify.
That's the condition for destructive interference. In other words, 2n minus 1 times lambda over 2, is this condition here, is equal to d sine theta. And that's the condition for dark fringes.
Right. So these two are exactly the same formula. D sine theta. Same difference. Equal sign, same result.
This is light fringes because x is a complete number of wavelengths. This is condition for dark fringes, destructive interference, because x is an odd number of half wavelengths. So let's now imagine that we have our 2 slits. Remember, these are essentially very small pinholes separated by less than a millimeter, but I'm drawing them much larger so that you can see what's going on.
Right. So he says less than a millimeter this time, so at least he doesn't horse shit around and say the wavelength of the light. So, you know, it's a little better.
And we have a screen over here, and the screen is going to have interference patterns. This is
right. So let's just say it again. D, the variable D in the single slit math represents the width of the slit, and the D in the double slit experiment represents the distance between the slits. So completely different variable, and no talk or conversation about why those two things would be related. Why would the width of the slit be so intimately related, so comparable, so much that you can basically use the same designation in a mathematical formula for both things, when all that represents is really the distance between the surfaces? If you really thought about it, what D really means is distance between surfaces. That's the consistent point between the single slit and the double slit, is the D variable represents the distance between the surfaces. So in the opening of the single slit experiment, the d equals the distance from this surface to this surface. In the double slit experiment, the d equals the distance from this surface to this surface. That's the consistency. Again, this is about surfaces. This experiment is not about slits. It's about surfaces. Damn. People are just so fucking stone cold brain dead.
We are drawing intensity, in other words, in this way that shows the brightness on the screen. The brightness falls off as you get further and further out, fringes go.
Yes, and you can logically think that if there was an anomaly that was happening between the photon interacting with the matter. So here's the matter moving and erbing and gerbing and blah, 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 blah. The surface of the matter is doing this. It's browning, motioning. It's got atoms. It's jiggling. It's hot. It's blah, 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 blah. And the photon's going through that. And you can sort of think and understand that, you know, it's really likely for the photon to miss it, you know, because there's some open space here. But, you know, then some photons go right near the edge and they just get fucked with a little bit. So they go a little bit of an angle off. And then some photons hit a lot of this crap and they get bent a lot. Perfectly logical explanation. No many worlds, no Copenhagen radar, no fucking duality problems, no bullshit at all, no mediums necessary, no crap at all. Simple, clean explanation.
Reduce in brightness, but they are still very visibly bright, dark fringes. And what we get
right, bright, dark, where they're supposed to be bright to dark, and then bright to dark, and bright to dark, and they don't do that.
And to do is we're going to look at the first fringe, the first area of brightness. There will always be one bright fringe opposite the double slits, but we're going to look at the first fringe above the central fringe. And that's going to...
And so this is just math. I mean, I should probably just skip it, but then somebody will say, I skipped something important, but he's just going to redo what he just did, which is basically say, here's N1, here's N2, here's N3, and let's just do the math again. You know, so it's, I don't know, this part just seems incredibly uselessly and redundant.
Be at an angle theta. And we've already shown what the condition for a bright fringe is. It is that n lambda equals d sine theta. And obviously for the first fringe, n will equal 1. So here it's just lambda equals d sine theta.
So you can see that it's in the double slit is where this n is 0. This hump and this hump are 1. This hump and this hump are 2. So that's what the n designates. The n isn't some magical variable number. It's just saying hump 1, hump 2, hump 3, hump 4. That's all it is. Nothing magical at all.
Let's suppose that the first fringe is a distance y above the center of the middle fringe. So we're measuring this in distance. And the distance from the slit.
So this is like not very interesting in the sense that this is all they ever do with their specially super cool math is just predict how far away this N1, N2, and N3 will be. And it's like really easy to do. And so they do it, but it's not very interesting information. And what isn't never done is doing the little subtle gradations and comparing it to the actual experiments and pointing out how, yes, the mathematic predicts a linear progression from light to dark. The line should look like this, and the line looks like this. There's not, the linear progression doesn't exist the way it should.
It's to the screen is capital D. then y over d is simply the tangent of the angle theta. And if it's a small angle, that is the same as the sine of the angle theta, because it's theta.
Yeah, and who cares about that one? That's something I never really understood. You can just look up tangents, right? So especially now in the Google universe, I could just say tangent of 0.60 or something, and it'll, it's no big deal. Well, I guess I have to give it an angle, tangent of an angle. But I mean, it's not going to be that difficult, is it?
Very small. Then this distance here is d, and the horizontal, sorry, the hypotenuse is also, as far as it matters, also d. So for small angles, you can say that y over d is sine theta. And that means, using this formula here, that n lambda is equal to d times sine theta, which is y over d. So if you've got, typically in an exam, you'd be given some of those values, and you have to work out what the rest are. You'll notice, incidentally, that as n increases, n becomes 1, 2, 3, and so on. So y will progressively increase. So the next fringe will be twice y, the third fringe will be 3 times.
Right. So it's exactly proportional distances away. So again, as I'm pointing out, sine theta is an angle, say 3 degrees, and it's going to be a multiple of 3 degrees. All the ends will be a multiple of the first end. So whatever the first end value is, whatever the first sine theta, whatever the sine theta for your slit width, or for the separation between the surfaces, okay, the separation between the surfaces will dictate the angle along with the frequency of the light. Those things put together, the wavelength, I say frequency, they say wavelength, but same thing, will decide what that angle is. And then that angle will just be doubled, tripled, quadrupled, blah, blah, blah. So it's just a ray. So it's just like the center of the atom. There's rings at specific locations. The photon will be bent a specific amount by each incursion, or it will be a multiple. The event that's causing this pattern, the event, you could argue, is the 3 degrees. And each photon can have more than one event. If it has 2 events, then it's 6 degrees. If it has 3 events, it's 9 degrees. If it has 4 events, it's 12 degrees. It's that simple. An explanation satisfies the conditions of the experiment. You don't need to do anything complicated. Let's see if the liars have anything to say. Nope, no new lying comments. Okay, good.
Y, but only as long as theta is a small angle. As soon as theta becomes large, tan theta is no longer broadly equivalent to sine theta.
And the largest the angle can get is 90 degrees, right? So, and as he pointed out, it's a weird, well, I should wait till he gets to that part, but it is kind of funny because basically it's an infinity thing. I mean, you can cut these angles into a million little pieces. So, even though, I mean, obviously when you're slicing angles, right, there's no limit to how thin a slice you can make theoretically, because there's no Planck constant in your way that's been established. So in a sense, in 90 degrees, you have an infinite number of slices you could possibly make. And that's part of the problem with this nonsense. They think this pattern keeps going. Now, as I've pointed out, I've seen no experiment where, say, at 45 degrees, where you see no pattern at all. The pattern's this big on projected, let's say the pattern's a foot across. I've never seen, but it's always the angle depends on the distance. So it gets a little confusing. How far away you are from the surface will dictate how big that. Well, actually, it won't. It'll stay consistent. So the pattern will get much smaller as you bring the source closer, the projection screen, you will narrow the projection. And so it'll stay consistent. So what I'm saying is what they don't do is put photographic plates out here, at 45 degrees, let's say. Put photographic plates and wait a week and see if you get any pattern. Because theoretically, by their theory, you should. Have they ever proven it? No. I would argue that, no, the pattern runs out. Because the odds of a photon, as I just pointed out, these are events. The odds of the photon having 600 events is very low, like 0. It's not going to have 600 events. It'll get consumed by the wiggly matter. The wiggly matter will consume the photon if it goes too deep into the wiggles. So it has to just go through a certain amount of wiggles and it can survive. But if it goes too deep into the wiggles, it's just going to get eaten up. So my theory says there is nothing out there. But again, the experiment hasn't been done. But this is one I probably should be able to do. I mean, I can put my camera on a time exposure, and I should be able to at least demonstrate my camera can't pick up any photons way out there. All right, so more sock accounts in Mendham Reckoning. So, I hope you wasted your time. Let's see. You really should allow folks to post links. I don't stop people from posting links, so it's not something I do, asshole. I'm trying to post a link. Well, why don't you just post it to the exact text of a Google search or a search on YouTube? Why don't you just put the title down that actually gets me to the video? A 3D wave equation. I mean, this is idiotic. Nowhere in this conversation, nothing in this conversation has anything to do with a 3D wave equation. Nobody's doing this in 3 dimensions. Nobody's doing Newton's rings here. And this is a specific argument being made about what Huygens does and this other crap. Why should I give a shit about a 3D wave equation? It's not just angle theta. Of course it is just angle theta, you liar. It's a partial diffie. Again, this has got to be the cowboy. Who else uses this fucking diffie thing? Q. It's a partial diffie, Q. Doesn't matter. These are all derivatives. He just derived this. He just sit there and switch the tangent with the sign and flip this over that. So what? Doesn't change the facts. And again, there's no fact here. The Huygens is before you do the math. You have to do the fucking goddamn algebra before you can do the math. And the algebra is just a shorthand for that has nothing to do with a wave. It has to do with an angle. It has to do with a ray of light. He even draws them as rays of light. Do you see his fucking drawing, for fuck's sake? Do you see a wave in this drawing? Or do you see a fucking goddamn line? When he drew the 2 lines, right? They were lines, weren't they, asshole? Like rays? You fucking idiot. Just don't say nobody's shown the. Yes, you haven't shown the evidence. You're a fucking liar. I'm not going to read the rest of your comments. This is bullshit. I've described the website. The website is a sack of fucking shit. It answers none of the questions I posed, not a single one of them. This is just lying sack of shit bullshit. It doesn't compare the math to any real experiment. It is an improved equation. It doesn't do a goddamn thing. It's completely irrelevant to the points I'm making. Not relevant in one fucking way is it relevant. It doesn't answer the fucking question. Why are there 2 waves in the single slit and only 2 waves in the double slit? Answer the fucking question or I'm blocking you every single post you make. Answer the fucking question.
How many fringes will there be apart from the central fringe? This is fringe number 1, 2, 3, 4. How many fringes do you get? Well, the answer is that we know that.
Okay, so he doesn't answer the question, because by his theory, the answer is almost infinite.
N lambda equals d sine theta, which means that n lambda over d is equal to sine theta. And n is increasing in integer steps. And so you can keep going until n lambda over d would be greater than 1.
Right. And that doesn't happen until you go past 90 degrees. Well, you have to hit 90 degrees. So 0 to 89.999999999999999 infinity degrees works fine. So it's only when you hit 90 degrees that you're finished. So they say the pattern goes effectively forever. They've never tried to prove it. They didn't even try, you know, like I said, it's quite provable. Just put the photographic plates at a 45-degree angle, 45-degree angle here, 45-degree angle there. Let them sit there for a week and see if you get a beautiful pattern.
Because you can't have a sine theta greater than 1. So as long as n lambda over d is less than 1,
so this is really provable. I mean, I actually have an old film camera. I mean, maybe I can do it with an old film camera. You know, I have to make a really dark room. You know, dark box of some kind. You know, I have to have a light source that I can keep on. You know, a laser beam's going to burn out. So I just use a light bulb or something. But maybe that's an experiment somebody else would like to do, you know, to gain some fame as debunking quantum mechanics, because it really hasn't been done. And it's not that hard to do. So MIT, with all its scientists and all its little apprentices and all its doctoral candidates and all its bullshit people, not one of them was at all thought that, man, well, maybe I should prove that this pattern goes forever. You know, theoretically forever. I mean, it's going to go forever as long as you have a flat surface. And obviously the pattern will spread. So the further out you go, the more the angle is going to be, the length won't be true to what it should be, because it's going to get stretched like a movie projector on a wide screen. Sometimes the out periphery gets stretched. So unless you have a curved surface, you know, you're not going to be able to get the true impression.
You can keep going.
And that's something that none of me have ever even talk about, is the fact that they shouldn't be projecting this on a flat screen, because the measurements are all kind of wrong. So again, they're perfect math and they're perfect this and they're perfect that, and they clearly haven't done it under rationally perfect circumstances. So more of the stock accounts. Fuck you. I'm not reading any of it. Fuck you. You're not going to get any gratification or satisfaction here at all, because I'm not reading any of it. Fuck off. You fucking insane troll. To borrow your rhetorics, 2 waves are created at the single slit and 4 waves are created at the double slit. Where were the 4 waves demonstrated? That was what the page demonstrated. Where did it do that? Where? You should be able to post the title to the page. You don't have to post the link. Just post the title to the page, and I'll go rip the page another asshole. So just post the fucking title to the fucking page, and I'll Google it. Give me the title of the fucking page. Why did the page use all those integrals for the double slit? Again, because it was actually doing the single slit envelope bullshit. That's why. It was modifying the one pattern, the double slit bars. It was modifying it to the shape of the single slit. That's why it did all those integrals. Shithead.
We'll get as many fringes as you can have n lambda over d being less than 1. But
I mean, quite obviously, in this simplistic math, there is no accounting for the fact that the double slit pattern has 2 patterns in it. He didn't mention the 2 patterns, right? I didn't even fault him for it, because no one does, right? So he didn't show, when he's showing this double slit pattern, I mean, I can make the mouse move, right? I mean, he's showing the pattern. That's not actually how the pattern looks. It actually goes, it bulges here for 6 little marks or 8, and then it goes completely dead, and then it starts up again, and then goes completely dead, and then starts up again. So there's actually 2 fucking patterns, and he didn't even deal with those 2 patterns. You fucking lying sack of shit. They're not. It's not the same question, you shithead. Huygens creating fucking 2 waves, and the double slit only creating 2 waves is the issue you're not addressing, shithead. Oh, just amazing. Amazing, amazing, psychotic.
The minute
loonies.
you get an n such that n lambda over d is greater than 1, that's a fringe you're not allowed to have. And the reason, of course, is that when sine theta equals 1, the angle theta will equal 90 degrees, which means this angle here is 90 degrees. If you attempt to go any further, even at 90 degrees, that light will never hit the screen. We now move on to the single slit.
Yeah, so this is where it gets funny, right? I'm funnier. I mean, badder. All right, Google Stock Exchange question on wave interference. Fine, so I'll save that, and I will make another video going over that piece of crap bullshit. I'll again point out how he never proves any of it. He never applies it to an actual experiment, never touches anything real anywhere. Huygens is not created 2 waves, though. What is that supposed to? So that's a proper argument. Huygens is not creating 2 waves, though. Clearly, that's what it did in a single slit. You're just a lying sack of shit. There can be no wave interference without the 2 waves. Huygens clearly creates the 2 waves. I've never heard a physicist argue, when they actually acknowledge the existence of the waves, to argue that there's no 2 waves in the single slit experiment. There's always 2 fucking waves. So you're just a fucking sack of shit liar. Huygens is not creating 2 waves. Of course it is. I'm not evading anything. I'm answering your question by stating that the methods can be applied consistently. They cannot. All your bullshit. Know what they're saying? Okay. They're saying it's an infinite number of waves. Now, do you think that's a better explanation? It creates an infinite number of waves, and the only ones we're going to count are this one and one that's a half a phase away, the middle one, or this end one and this middle one. That's what they do with their math. And it ends up creating 2 waves. You can't see how, if you only count, okay, if you always measure from the middle to a surface, that's half a wave. You can't figure that out for yourself. You can't figure out that if I have an infinite number of waves in here, and then I'm going to say, well, they all cancel each other out, except this wave and this wave. These are the only 2 that don't cancel each other out. And that's all they do. And you don't think that's a fucking gimmick? You're going to seriously tell me you don't think that's a gimmick? Then I think you're an idiot. It uses an integral, not 2 point sources. You can't go anywhere or do anything until you create those 2 point sources. So you're just lying. Without the 2 point sources, you can't do your algebra, jackass. There's no fucking equation. There's no sine theta without it. So you're just full of shit. Well, not that there's no sine theta. There's nothing to apply the sine theta to. There's no triangle. All right, you never answer the question. I'm answering your question by stating the method can be applied consistently. It can't be. That's just crap. Absolute fucking crap. It's not consistent. It's just fucking gerrymandered. It's just manipulated and hidden. But the truth is, there's always 2 waves in a single slit experiment, and there's always just 2 waves in the double slit experiment. That's the fucking truth, and you're just a fucking liar for the liars. Fucking liar. Yeah. You fucking liar. Again, this is just so amazing. I'm pointing out how there's like 15 errors in this video done by a serious physicist. And there's 15 errors in here. Just fucking 15 errors.
Experiment. So here is my single slit, and just like the ripples from the pond, that is going to produce, it's a Huygens source, so you're going to get light diffracted through the slit and coming out in all directions.
Yeah, now he has to say, well, gee, there's no interference there, is there? So how am I going to make interference? And here's the canard. I mean, here's the bullshit. Here it comes.
And it will be a plane wave coming from a monochromatic source that comes up to the slit and then emerges in all directions. And on the screen, what you will find is that you will get a bright area of light right opposite the slit. It will fall to 0, and then you will get small areas of light, fringes.
All right, so again, this isn't the truth, okay? So you just open that slit a tiny bit, and those little fringes, those little baby bumpies get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more numerous. And you can have 40, I've counted 40 bars in a single slit. And look how he drew it. And this isn't fucking deception. Yes, it's fucking deception. The only way you get this pattern is you have to make the slit so fucking tiny. That's it. That's the only way you get this pattern. And you don't even get that pattern. You get a really wide center, really wide, and, you know, little fringes.
On either side of the predominantly bright, this is a measure of intensity or brightness on the screen.
So you never get this exact pattern, actually, because when you visually look at it, to be that narrow proportional to the other fringes, it's always the center maxima is 3 times the size of it's like 3 units of space versus the usual 1 unit for each bar. So that's the proportional difference. And if you actually do the experiment, you'll be able to see a lot more little humps. So you'll see a lot more bars at that proportion.
Now, you might say there cannot be any interference here because we've only got one source.
Right, there you go. Yes, now your answer to that problem is, and this is just going to be no answer. There'll be no direct answer to that point.
One Huygens source. It's like throwing one pebble into a pond. There is nothing for the ripples to interfere with. So how can we get this admittedly small but nonetheless real?
So again, he says admittedly small but real. So again, this is just distortion, because again, you can show tons. Google single slit and you'll see tons of bars. Okay, it's not this obscure, hard to find pattern. It's a really easy pattern to create. You can create with a single needle and you'll get lots of bars. You're not going to get this crap. So again, just more distortion, more not accurate, not entirely, not completely, not close enough to accurate enough.
Interference pattern. Well, let's magnify the slit to see what's going on.
The magical magnification again, which again isn't magnifying anything. Just more horse shit. The magnification will be a bigger distortion. He'll magnify the errors. He won't magnify the truth.
The slit and the width of the slit is d. Now, in the double slit experiment, d was the distance between the slits. Very important to remember this. In the double slit experiment, d is the distance between the slits. In the single slit experiment, d is the thickness of the single slit.
So, and he doesn't have any comment on that. He just says it, right? So he's admitting, oh, look, you know, yeah, this is important to recognize that we just completely changed the variable. And again, no thought about why that works. Why should it work that you can completely change a variable like that? And the reason is why is because it's the distance between the surfaces. That's all D represents. The distance between the surfaces. This is a surface experiment. It has nothing to do with slits. That's why the single needle creates the pattern, because it's about the fucking surfaces. You fucking stone cold, brain dead, obstinate, nitpicking, motherfucking petty bastards.
And once again, I'm going to consider, because of course light is going to emerge from here in all directions, but I'm going to consider the wave that emerges again at an angle of theta.
Which all the 1 zillion, right? The infinite number of Huygens sources in here are all doing sine theta. But we'll get to it.
And once again, I'm going to drop a perpendicular down here, and this distance we know is the thickness of the slit, which is D. But of course, light is emerging from all points in this slit.
All points, so just a vague notion of pointness. Blah, 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 blah. The waves are emerging, right? So he's saying light is emerging. When we know, so almost implying, so his lines are straight lines, let's understand, like rays. And he's saying these rays essentially are emerging from all these points. Well, that is, the photon can go in any particular place in between the two slits. It's not, there's no, it can only go here or it can only go here. It can go anywhere between the slits. So in that sense, it's actually true. The photon can go anywhere in between those two slits. But how does a wave do that? So here he's clearly using particle analogies, straight line force, straight line movement, rays. He's using rays to do his illustrating when he's arguing this is a wave. And you people can't see the irony in that.
So let's take another light wave, which is coming up from the midpoint of the slit.
Yes, so we've just arbitrarily now, hasn't he clearly just arbitrarily said, let's find a way to split it in half with a line going down the middle. So he just turned it into 2 waves. Didn't you see him just do it with no explanation for why he just did it? He just did it. He just said, let's draw a line in the middle. And so now I can create 2 waves because I can't do it without that line in the middle. I'm fucked. Without that line in the middle, I got shit. So let's just draw the line in the middle so I can make this rational somehow. I can make this absolute steaming pile of crap rational by just drawing that arbitrary, motherfucking, erroneously placed line in the middle to fix my problem. Dark matter, anyone? I mean, this is just a contrivance. I'm just going to contrive an excuse to create 2 waves. And that's all he did here. Just contrived it. Just fucking drew it. Said, here, I'm making the explanation by drawing a line. There. Aren't you satisfied with that explanation? I drew the line. Isn't that enough of an explanation? I don't have to explain why I drew the line, do I? No, because the only reason why he drew the line is so he can make 2 waves.
And your eye is picking up all of these. Now then, this distance here, we're going to call x, just as we did before. And by geometry, once again, we can say that x is d times the sine of theta. And once again, we can draw in the wavelength up here. And we can ask ourselves, suppose x is a whole number of waves.
Suppose. Let's just suppose I just made 2 waves.
Wavelengths. Let's, for the sake of this illustration, assume it's 1 wavelength. Then that would be 1 wavelength.
So he just did it, right? I mean, you could just see how he's now drawing 2 waves. No explanation for where the 2 waves came from. He just drew them. No explanation for why he drew them. just drew them.
And then the waves continue, and you can see that they are completely, or they should be if I've drawn it properly, they will then be in phase. So this wave and this wave are in phase. In phase, you might think you'll get constructive interference and brightness. But of course, if this is one wavelength here, then at this point, halfway up, it will only be half a wavelength.
There we go. So, yes, of course, the one in between the two has to be exactly half of what's in between the two. Gee, what a surprise. So they're full waves on the two outsides, and right in between, they have to be a half a wave. Gee, nobody could figure that out. And it's on the line I arbitrarily, for no good reason whatsoever, drew that doesn't belong there for any reason whatsoever, except I need to make another wave. And so now he can't use the two furthest apart waves because they don't give the right answer. He has to use this wave and this, or this wave and this wave, but he can't do it if he goes this big. He has to make them half and half. He has to create two smaller waves. That's the only way it works. That's the only way the math will work. He has to make two smaller waves come out of the single slit. Period. And this is just contrived. It's just made up. He gave you heard it, right? No explanation when he drew that middle line. Nothing. What if we just draw a middle line? Okay. Yeah, it changes the whole thing. Now I can make two waves. Complete bullshit.
And so the remainder of the wave will proceed like that, which means that this wave is out of phase with this wave, and this wave is out of phase with this wave.
Yes, isn't that amazing?
And if you think about it, at every point on the top half of the slit, there will be a corresponding...
Right, so I can make the same two waves go all the way across this way, and I can make the same two waves go all the way across up this way. So what? Yeah, obviously you can do that all you want. Once you've created two waves, you can move them anywhere you want, because that movement won't change anything at all, because it's less than a millimeter wide slit. So obviously it's not going to change on the pattern any at all. So you can put the two waves any place you want to. I mean, you can't have them overlap, obviously.
Point in the bottom half of the slit that will be exactly 1/2 a wavelength out. So just as this one is completely out of phase with this, because they are 1/2 a wavelength apart, so all the way down the top half of the slit, there will be a corresponding point in the bottom half of the slit, which will be exactly out of phase. Consequently, the sum total of all the waves coming in the top half of the slit will cancel with the sum total of all the waves coming from the bottom half of the slit to give you darkness.
Right, and the only thing left will be this top one, the middle one, and this one, magically, creating two waves.
So when x is d sine theta, for a double slit experiment, that's the condition for brightness. In the single slit experiment, this is the condition for darkness. This indeed is the condition for getting your first dark point when x is equal to lambda. So
n lambda, but that's because they changed where the ends are. The n isn't the same point. It starts with a 0 in the one experiment. It starts with a 1 in the next experiment. That's the difference. So again, none of this crap has anything to do with the fact that they changed the designation. They added the 0. The 0 now exists where the 0 didn't exist before. Fuck.
X equals lambda, you get the formula lambda equals d sine theta, which is the condition for the first dark fringe. And you'll notice something else, that since the wavelength of the light is unchanged, as d decreases, theta must increase. So in other words, as you make the slit smaller, you will get a greater spread of the light, because theta, which of course is
And the same is true in the double slit. So again, that's not something you compare the two experiments and make a comparison between them, because it's true for both experiments. Well, in the second experiment, obviously the D isn't the slit width. So actually, as you increase or decrease D, you're bringing the slits closer together. So both Ds are bringing the surfaces closer together. So yes, it's consistent between both experiments. The pattern gets wider as you make the slits smaller. Just a fact. Or the impediment smaller. Yes, that's why the diffraction gradient produces the dots in the diffraction gradient are very far apart.
The angle from the midpoint to the first dark fringe, that's the angle theta will get larger. So paradoxically, as you make the slit smaller, the light spreads out more.
Again, true in both experiments. So not useful in making comparison between single slit and double slit. And again, he didn't explain at all his artificial creation of two waves, which he just did.
Once again, we can draw the position. Here is the slit. Here is the screen. Opposite the slit, you're going to get a bright area of light. This is, again, measure of intensity. And then some interference fringes.
I mean, just amazing deception of, distortion of the pattern. The pattern is just so much more intricate and involved than that. It's just such a disgusting, cheap generalization, in the sense that, yes, this is true. You can get a pattern that poor, but again, it still won't be this shape, in the sense of you're measuring intensity, but the width of this will be much larger. And the width of these little fringes will be larger. So proportionally, the base, you see this base here? This one will always have a bigger base, but it's only going to be a 3 times bigger base. It's only going to be bigger by 3 times. These little humps should have a base as wide as 1/3 of this center base. And see, just drew them as little tiny little things. No, they should be pretty big humps, pretty long humps, not such short little humps. So again, it's just not accurate, and it should be accurate, shouldn't it? Foundational experiment for this queer and bizarre story of how, Huygens, Heisenberg, many worlds, Copenhagen, all kinds of wacky theories about radar and, fucking pilot waves and all kinds of silly stories. And you think they could tell the damn thing right. If they're going to tell us a wacky UFO story, don't you think they should get these details right?
You get interference because there's actually interference between the light that emerges from different points in the slit. And if we look at...
It's not interference from different points in the slit. Again, it's interference by the specific creation of two waves. And it's just nonsense to say it's happening some other way.
The first dark fringe, and we measure the distance theta, and we say that fringe is a distance y above the center of the central fringe, and we say that the slit is a distance d, capital D, from the screen. Then we know that y over d is the tangent of theta, and once again, for small angles, it will also be the sine of theta. And so consequently, we've got this formula here. Lambda over d is sine theta. Lambda over d is sine theta, but sine theta is y over capital D. Or if you like, y is equal to lambda times capital D over small d. So if you want to know how far up the screen y will be, then if you know the wavelength, you know the distance from the slit to the screen, you divide that by the width of the slit, you'll get the distance up the screen.
Right. So simple variables, just the distance, the width, the frequency of the light. That's all this is. So those are the only factors. All right, you don't need all this wave theory. All you need is an understanding that there's an incremental change: 3 degrees, 6 degrees, 9 degrees, 12 degrees. It could be 4, it could be 4, 8, 12, 16. It could be any multiple of any theta number. I'm just giving you an arbitrary example, theta of 3 degrees.
We now move to diffraction gratings. And what are diffraction gratings? Well, typically a diffraction grating, this is pretty much kind of actual size, about 2 to 3 centimeters square. And don't ask me how they do it, but engineers manage to draw lines on a diffraction grating. And they can get typically something like 13,000 lines.
Yeah, well, nobody uses 13,000 for too much, but anyway, mostly it's 1,000 or 500 you're typically used. But anyway, so I don't think there's any need to go into this diffraction gradient part, because he's already left out so much to the conversation about the single slit and the double slit. And obviously the biggest thing left out was the envelope argument, that the double slit is inside the envelope of the single slit pattern. Also left out is the obvious inference that the d variable, small d, is really just the distance between the surfaces. So anyway, horrible video in terms of its accuracy and facts. It's just an example. It's a typical example. They do it in MIT, they do this in Yale, they do this in Stanford. They just fuck with the facts just so they can tell their 3 bear story and try to make it make sense. And it's a fairy tale. The whole thing's a pile of made up crap. There's no evidence of Heisenberg. There's no evidence of Huygens, actually happening. That waves, even if they were waves, even if photons were waves, there's no evidence that they break into an infinite number of little wavelets. There's no evidence that any of that shit happens. And it clearly implies raylets. It clearly, it overtly says to you in that when you draw it on a piece of paper, it starts looking like rays all over the place. It doesn't look anything like a wave. The algebra looks everything, the geometry looks everything like rays. It doesn't look anything like waves. And, all I get is fucking crap from people for fucking defending facts. It's just amazing fucking human garbage. This planet is just covered with fucking fanatic religious kooks. And obviously all this energy defending this garbage science, this junk science, this pseudo lazy science, this we want to believe it so we don't give a shit about the details. Fuck doing the Eddington experiment the right way. Fuck doing any of this stuff to prove that any of this crap we're defending actually happens. We'll just say it's the most proven theory in the history of mankind. Yet, if you look at your proof sucks. And you fuckers just keep defending this garbage, junk, shit, trash. It's garbage. Intellectuals should find this fucking revolting, that this is fucking this is the propaganda used. They can't make an intelligent argument. They can't make an accurate argument. Instead, they just keep lying about the strength of their evidence. They keep distorting the fucking truth, the facts, the evidence. And that's all they're doing. They're distorting it, quite obviously. And they don't think they are, because they, in their heads, haven't even thought about any of this shit. They haven't really done it. I mean, the fact that he could sit there and draw that silly representation of the single slit experiment, when we know the single slit experiment is essentially Newton's rings. And I'm sure he's seen pictures of Newton's rings with 100 rings. I'm sure he's seen it. I'm sure he understands that it can have a lot of rings in it. So how could he possibly think his stupid little representation is an accurate representation of Newton's rings? If anybody drew Newton's rings with that stupid hump and the little tiny bumps, somebody would say, you're not doing Newton. That's not Newton's rings. I can see Newton's rings. I mean, Newton's rings are a lot more than that. You know, a lot more visible. I can see a lot more detail than that drawing showed. So, anyway. All right, so no comments, no further comments that I can see, right? So we just have trolls tonight. It's Friday, so that's understandable, I suppose. I probably shouldn't do rooms on Fridays. Probably shouldn't. Let's see how bad the viewers are. 13, well, about average, unfortunately. So I'll give you a second if you have anything to say, but not likely, right? Yeah. Nobody can muster the correct answer, which is, yes, Gary, what you're saying sounds perfectly correct. Science should be better than this. Seems to me they're exaggerating their evidence, and that's all they're doing. They just don't have any hard evidence. They don't have enough evidence to be as confident as they are, and they're just preaching sermons. They're just telling us how God loves you. The quantum loves you, and it's going to leap to your defense, and it's going to quantize your profitability, and it's going to, they're just talking absolute shit about a magical world that doesn't exist, where in other universes, you get to be, not overweight and not bald, and get to have a big penis and all that kind of crap. And so you can just feel better because in some other universe, you're doing so much better than you are in this crappy universe. Or some bullshit like that. They're just selling you bullshit. A bullshit fairy tale. Happily ever after in the quantum singularity. La, 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 la. So another fucking sock account. So goodbye, fucker. Again, I'm not reading it, so you can just waste your time. Fine. Waste your time, asshole. Jesus. People. This fucking God, I hope they all get fucking, I hope you all die of some sort of fucking plague or something. Fucking useless packs of shit. You got this fucking brain, 100 billion neurons, and you fucking are belligerently ignorant. Belligerently ignorant. You're just right in my face, sitting here defending shit. Obvious propaganda, distortions, manipulations, perversions. You're just sitting there defending that. It's the way things should be. Tell me some lies. Alrighty then. So, till the next time and such. When I again will expose the fakes, the frauds, the phonies, the ignorant, the lazy scientists who are proclaiming their great victory over the secrets of the universe. And they haven't got shit. They got a fucking fable.